All right, so yes, I am, well, that looks very strange to have doctor in front. I just finished my PhD 2 months ago, so it's still very fresh. Thank you, thank you. I'll take all the applause I can get for that. Yeah, and I'm very privileged to have the opportunity to come here from Toronto to Edinburgh to talk a bit about this, what started as a research project together with the Resuscitation Research Group and has now morphed into something that is larger and more public-facing and, most importantly, more impactful than whatever a research paper could do. So I'll start, with a little bit about public access defibrillation, and I'll talk a little bit about, just a tinge about the past and about the present of where we are and looking towards the future. And then I'll hand it off to Ben B to be able to do that. So how many of you have looked at the exhibits either this morning or during lunch, specifically the AEDs that were out there? That's great, good show of hands. For those of you who haven't, shameless plug, please support our sponsors so we can keep doing this and support our cardiac arrest research. So suffice it to say, I think most of us have not seen this one. Right? So it's suffice to say that we've come a long way since the 1940s when this was really kind of the first prototypical working defib that's been out there. But more nowadays, we are interested in these kinds of automated external defibrillators, or AEDs for short. They're very intelligent. I have an engineering background, but I will spare you the details of all the engineering of what goes on in this device, right? Suffice to say that as laypersons, we try to be there in time, right? That's the most critical part. Do our chest compressions, apply the pads onto the patient, and then press the on button, and then just listen and to the prompts and deliver the shock as needed, right? So, defibrillators are great, and one of the ways that we want to have defibs out in the public is to have what's called a public access defibrillation program, or PAD, right, or PAD, right? Not to be confused with the pads on the pad itself, right? I always find that a little bit confusing, but just to be clear of what that's about, right? So hopefully most of us, if not all of us, have seen boxes like these, right, of varying colors, varying sizes, but hopefully, most critically, containing an automated external defibrillator inside so that we can go and retrieve it, right, for a nearby cardiac arrest and apply it to the patient, right? There is a lot of things to be said about this particular one, not to shame whoever's this one is, right? But there is a lock on it. So I think that is just warranting to be said out there. My personal opinion is that, in order to expedite access to the AED itself, right, that there should not be a lock. But and I think that opinion, it just needs to be put out there, right? So with the public access defibrillation program, right, or this PAD program, right, we want to put defibs, right, in places where they are easily accessible and where they're going to be used, right? And does a PAD program work? Well, statistically speaking, it does, right? And it's not just statistically speaking because we're talking about a casino, right, where one of the first studies to show that having rapid access to defibrillation can result in survival rates of up to 70%, right, for cardiac arrests that occur in the casino. But it's because it's an environment that is closely supervised. They want to make sure you're not running away with all the money and all the chips. But it works, right? If we can rapidly deploy defibrillators to cardiac arrests, then we can really optimize the chances of the patient surviving, right? And so, if something like this is working, right, then the natural conclusion should be we want to put defibs just about everywhere where they're going to be able to be used as rapidly as they are in casinos, right? And so the logic follows that we should be buying and placing pads out there. And we've done a really good job here in Scotland, right? Especially the past few years, right? We have more than since, and this is a little bit older data to the end of to like mid 22, right? But over the past few years, we have more than doubled the number of registered pads known to the ambulance service. And really, if they're not known to the ambulance service, they might as well not exist. So we've done a very good job here of incentivizing or motivating people and organizations to be able to place the pads out there. If we put them out there, the intuition that it follows that they're going to be used. Is that right? Well, what does the data say? Right? I'm a numbers guy. I really like seeing these numbers. That's part of my research. So if we put more pads out there, the logic follows that more people should have a pad. More cardiac arrest patients should have a pad applied to them before the arrival of ambulance service. Unfortunately, the data suggests that that's not very true. Right? We've more than doubled the number of pads placed out there and known to the ambulance service so that they can be dispatched, so that people can be dispatched and told where the nearest pad is. But the rate of pad usage has stagnated at around 10% with some random variation, right? And so we still have a long way to go in terms of improving and increasing the rates of defibrillator use before the arrival of ambulance service, right? And one of the questions, or one of the reasons why that's not working is because of things like this, right? So, again, not to shame whoever did this, right? I know they have the right intentions in mind, right? But if you're going to put a defib out in the middle of a field, right? What are the chances that someone is going to have a cardiac arrest nearby, right? What are the chances that that defib that's in there is going to be used before the arrival of ambulance services? I would say very low, right? And I know this is a bit more of an extreme example, right? But in general, at least for Scotland, and is replicable in other parts of the world, we're just not placing pads where they need to be, right? Here's a graph that looks at the pad usage rate, right? So the usage of a defib before the arrival of ambulance services to a cardiac arrest, right? And the distance to the nearest public defib, right? So on the left, you've got 100 meters, right? So if the nearest defib is within 100 meters, there's about a 25% chance that patient will have a defib used. As you increase that distance and it gets farther away to have to bring the defib over to the patient, right, that usage rate drops to 10% and then eventually down to 0, right, just because the nearest defib is going to be too far. Right? So we know that we want to put defibs where cardiac arrests are likely to occur, right? And put them proximally, because then it's easy, just grab it, put it onto the patient, you save that time. You make sure you have that defib placed before the ambulance service arrives. Okay? But, how many defibs are actually within that range, right? Within the 100-meter range, it's about 4 to 5%, right? So only 1 in 20 pads are placed within 100 meters distance of a known cardiac arrest, right? And of course, as you increase that distance, right, you get this different relationship, right? You get more pads placed within 500 meters, but then, then it becomes too far, right? So how do we, develop a framework for how to place the pad, or where should the pads be placed, right? We should be using the data to inform us of where cardiac arrests occur, right? And then put the pads in the respective places where cardiac arrests are likely to occur so that they are actually going to be likely to be used, right? And this was a big part of my PhD in looking at the incidence rates of cardiac arrests in Scotland and then determining where pads ought to be placed, right? So does this data-driven placement framework, does it work, right? Does this strategy work? Well, we took a look at a pilot area in Falkirk, and I have to credit this part of the presentation to Martin Short, who is part of Friends of Forth Valley First Responders for making all this possible, right? We took a look at where the existing pads were, and then we took a look at where cardiac arrests were occurring, and then we used machine learning, artificial intelligence methods to determine where new pads ought to be placed, right? And for us to be able to determine where they would be of greatest value for future cardiac arrests, right? Does it work? Well, we did a bit of an experiment, right? And we placed 55 pads out there. About 60% of them were placed in using the data-driven suggested placement, right? And we found that first, they're accessible to 3 times more cardiac arrests if they were placed using the data-driven framework than from the existing and non-data-driven locations. Over the past 18 months, where we've been looking at this from an experimental point of view, the pads that were placed using data-driven placement accounted for 90% of pad deployments recorded in Falkirk that we know of, right, as a limitation. And they correspond to 85% of the shocks delivered to the patient, right? So that is a big difference between, having pads in places informed by data versus those not informed by data, right? So we know that this is going to work, right? And then the question becomes, how do we get this knowledge out there, right? It was, as part of my PhD, it was very painstaking to do this for Falkirk, right? But how do we get this knowledge out to the public? How do we do this for the rest of Scotland? And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Ben B, who will tell us, some of what we're going to be doing here.
Okay, well, look, it's really nice to be here. It's really nice also being a software developer and a UX designer in that I come at the end of this process. So these guys have been working for years, working really hard to make this happen, and I get to come and introduce a tool to you all that's the shiny bit. Yeah, it comes down to the work of these guys and a lot of partners who I'm going to just touch on at the end who made this happen. So it really is a team effort. Okay, so I guess the first question, what is PadMap? In the simple terms, it's an optimal location finder for the placement of new AEDs, and specifically for maximum impact, as you saw from what Ben was saying. A few key things that really matter. One, it's freely accessible. So this is a web app you can just go to, and you can just interact with all of the data in Scotland. It's real time, so it's pulling the data from British Heart Foundation, Scottish Ambulance Service, to ensure that when new pads are placed, all the positions get updated. So the optimal location is constantly changing with the data. It's educational. So the team behind this have been working hard to make sure that this is accessible to somebody who doesn't know anything about pads, and therefore how do we educate people about all the other aspects of pad placement, not just the optimal location. It focuses on pointing to lots of best resources. So this isn't trying to replace any of the resources that are there. It's trying to do the opposite, in fact, get people more engaged with all the great resources that are provided by all the different organizations that are working in this. And so we describe it as part of a toolbox. So it's just one little tool in this overall machine of trying to have an impact on cardiac arrest survival. So a key thing just to call out that the tool calls out, we need to use this with experts, local pad placers, people with local knowledge, people who are used to placing pads, and then, of course, national guidance. Then a question of who it's for, and then we'll actually just show you how it works. So key thing, we wanted to make it useful for everybody. So this is the picture of the Edinburgh Marathon, and there are going to be people out there who are going to go and raise money to place a pad, but they don't know anything about pad placement. And we want this tool to be useful, to excite them, to engage them, but then also point them to all the best things, best resources that are going to help them do that well. But we also want Falkirk. So we want the council who are committed to placing 55 pads. We want to make it useful to them, or whether it's Scottish Government. If the Scottish Government wants to deploy pads, how do we do that well? So it needs to work for everybody, from that person who knows nothing and is going to place one, all the way up to somebody who's going to place 100 pads. Okay, we're going to try a demo. I recorded a video so that I'll just narrate through. So it's an interactive map. We'll see if this plays. Don't know if I need to press something. There we go. Okay, so it uses an interactive map. You can see we've got Scotland mapped out here. And in the top left corner, you can browse by postcode. You can browse by city district, or browse by council area. So if we zoom into Edinburgh, you'll see it jumps into Edinburgh, or you can move across to, let's say, Glasgow City. And then similarly, you can drill down to a specific postcode. But for the purposes of this, we'll just show Edinburgh City. And then in the top right, you've got your various layers. You can turn these on and off. I'll run through them in a second, just once this. So to begin with, we've got arrest risk, and you can see here, this matches to what that Ben showed in that slide, where we've got the highest risk is in that population-dense centre of Edinburgh. And then actually across the north of Edinburgh, there's a few more higher risk areas, but then down in the south and in the west, much lower risk. And that does happen to kind of coincide with, social factors as well. Then you can layer on, let me move on. Okay, so then you can layer on all your existing pads, and this is coming from the circuit. So thanks to the circuit for providing that data. And then finally, what you'll see is in Edinburgh, there's really good density in the center of Edinburgh. And interestingly, quite a lot of density out in the west where it's less likely for you to have an arrest. And then finally, you can put your suggested locations on. And here you can just scroll through the slider, and it will start from one pad there in the south of the city. That's the optimal location at the moment. And then slowly but surely add more and more pads, and it will give you more and more optimal locations. And we'll go through the details of how this is calculated in a second. And then you can just layer all the data up. So if we zoom right in, to assist pad placers, you'll see all the DFibs that are currently there with that kind of 200-meter kind of diameter, 100-meter radius. And here you can see, here's a suggested location, Queen Street Gardens, or Princess Street Gardens, sorry. And we'll just browse up to one that's just in the north here. So the mapping tools are great. If you zoom, we'll zoom right in. Here's a suggested location. And so if somebody's browsing for the first time, this starts to give them an idea. Here's a 100-meter radius, 200-meter diameter. If you're going to place a pad anywhere in this zone, where's the best place to place it in the zone? And this is where that kind of local knowledge, local pad placers are brilliant. Maybe the best place is actually on the street corner, for example. Just another little worked example at postcode level, which I think is quite interesting. So we'll do EH9, which is literally right here. We're next to the Scot right now, if you're not from Edinburgh. And you can see here, this is EH9, and it's saying the best location right there is in Grange Lone. And that kind of makes some sense. I live near here, and that's where there's a lot of volume of traffic, so maybe there's more density of people there. But when we jump this up to, say, 5 pads, you'll see that specifically this first point is no longer part of the suggested location. So if we jump to 5, and the reason for that is that these other pads are actually providing that coverage. And that's the key thing about this, is that the team and the research, it's not just chaining one after the other. Here's the best, here's the second best, here's the third best. It's taking into account how many you plan on placing. And then it's doing all that complex algorithmic work to work out what's the optimal way to place those 5 pads, not the individual pads. Okay, finally, just in the bottom here, to try and help with collaboration, there's a way of sharing, and what it does is it allows you to take all of your settings and then share that with someone else. So if you're planning on placing 5 DFibs, here's a suggestion. You can share that link, and then other people will be able to see exactly what you were seeing and what you were looking at. So let's just zoom back up to Edinburgh for a second and just repeat Falkirk for 1 minute. So if you want to repeat Falkirk, you've got 30 pads. I didn't realize it was 55. And then right there you can see, if we wanted to repeat the exercise in Edinburgh, this is actually where the math would suggest we need to place our pads. It's quite interesting, that kind of ring around Edinburgh. Edinburgh Central, highest risk, but got great coverage at the moment. And so the data is kind of maybe giving us results that we might not intuit ourselves. Okay. How does it work? This is quite important, I think, just as we share this. The data to drive this comes from the circuit, the BHF. So as soon as somebody registers a pad, and that data becomes available in the feed. That's combined with the Scottish Ambulance Service, who have been brilliant, who collect all this cardiac arrest data, and that runs through this pad map engine that Ben and his team have built, and it's doing that on a nightly basis. So it ensures that if a pad was registered on the Wednesday, on Thursday, that location will no longer show. And that's really important if we're going to make a dent on this. Last couple of things for me to say. One is just thanks. So it's been created by University of Edinburgh, University of Toronto, Scottish Ambulance Service. Without these guys, this couldn't happen. We just came in at the end and built the shiny bit. So real thanks to them. It's already been mentioned, funded by St John's Scotland and the Scottish Government. Again, couldn't have happened without them. But also a few people to call out still on the bottom. PAD Scotland, British Heart Foundation, meant to put that in there. Good Sam, Save a Life for Scotland. Without these organizations, they've been helping us to think about and test the tool, think about the messaging, think about who we point to, make sure that it really does support those people from 1 pad right up to 100. And the PAD Scotland team have been brilliant. They're going to continue to beta test with us because we'll be launching this quarter. So we're just in that final phase. And I guess our hope as a team, us as well, but as a whole team, is that as we start to place pads and we start to see the data coming back from Falkirk, that it will actually mean more people get shocked. So what you can do is, once this is launched, you can share it, use it, feedback. Where you see anything that can be improved, let us know, and we'll work on that.